Hello, it is a beautiful day here on Skeptic Haven. This episode of Secular Soapbox is about the sons of God and the benefits of claiming this divine parentage would have for the aristocrats of the ancient world of Greece and Rome. Our special guest will help us to examine its history, origins, and cultural significance across different societies and religions. What advantages come with being called a son of God? We'll find out after the break. Hello there.
Hi.
It's great to host with you again, Stacy.
Thanks for hosting with me. Beth is at the Atheist Convention in Phoenix this week, so I'm super jealous.
Yes, same. So disappointed I wanted to be there, but happy and excited to be here doing the show with you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and we have a bunch of guests, so we probably should
Yes, we should. We need to get right to it.
Introducing them.
Yes.
Okay. So our first introduction is a familiar face to the channel, Pat Lowinger. Hello there, Pat.
Hi.
Hello.
Not only is Pat a great conversationalist and a great friend, excellent means of explaining ideas. He can get through to you like nobody's business. He is a historian, a writer, and educator with a passion for exploring the ancient Mediterranean world. Pat holds a master's degree in ancient history and a master's degree in archaeology, and currently pursuing his PhD in ancient Mediterranean studies. Yes, I'm going to keep going. He researches the ways in which the ancient indigenous and migrant cultures interacted with each other when the Romans were in charge of the western coast of the Black Sea. And Pat is also an active member of several academic associations and spends his summers conducting archaeological fieldwork at the Roman Byzantine fortress and civilian settlement of Palmyras in Romania. Dang, Pat.
Thank you. It's a little dated. I'm now digging in the United Kingdom, but good enough because now I know where you got that bio.
Yes. So. Yep. Well, and I think that you brought a friend with you tonight.
Oh, no, I'm not responsible for him. Wes invited him on his own.
Oh dear. Okay.
Take no responsibility, I'm guessing.
Nothing. Don't want nothing to do with that. But I'm still going to bring you on Robert Caudill. Thank you so much for being here. And this could be a little outdated too. I'm sorry, Robert. I was trying to find out if you had your PhD, but you were yanking my crane backstage. But welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you.
You are an archaeologist with a passion for uncovering the mysteries of the ancient world. He's got a bachelor's degree in anthropology and a master's degree in ancient Greek and Roman studies, and has excavated at Etruscan and Roman sites in Italy and Minoan site in Crete, and is currently a member of the staff of the excavation of the Roman Byzantine fort of Palmyra in Romania. And you also have a website that I checked out that has a lot of your discoveries and travels and little bits of information that you've collected along the way. Really cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I wouldn't call them discoveries, but it's just sites I've visited. Yeah, I didn't discover any of it.
Yeah, well, Columbus didn't discover America either, so there's that. I'll pass it over to you, Stacy.
Awesome. Well, next on our panel, we have Ed Dodge, an accomplished independent researcher and writer who is a dear friend of our show. Ed holds a degree in industrial relations and a master's in business administration from the prestigious Cornell University. He is best known for his work, A History of the Goddess, which explores the historical evolution of goddess worship across different cultures and time periods. Ed's extensive academic background and expertise makes him a valuable voice in the fields of sociology, history, and spirituality. We are delighted to have him as a guest on our show tonight. So thank you for being here.
Well, that was much too kind. Thank you so much for having me here. You know, I'm the hobbyist of the bunch here. I'm not the academic professional, and but yeah, I wrote a book about exploring Asherah and the goddesses in the Old Testament. I'm very curious and interested in these. That's the book I wrote. There you go. Hey, great. Thanks.
Awesome.
I'm very interested in the Mother Earth traditions. in the ancient world and as it carries through today. You know, I actually make my living in renewable energy, and I see this stuff playing through to environmentalism in the modern day. So I talk about that stuff too. That's a different topic.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least, we have Derrek Bennett. And Derrek Bennett, known by his username Atheologica, is a prominent content creator and intellectual on YouTube with a focus on atheism, skepticism, and critical thinking. Atheological videos provide insightful commentary on a variety of topics, including religion, science, and philosophy. He is known for his incisive analysis and ability to communicate complex ideas in an engaging and accessible manner. Derrek's videos are characterized by his sharp wit, which you will probably see tonight, articulate arguments, and a commitment to rational inquiry. As a result, he has amassed a large following of viewers who appreciate his unique perspective and thought-provoking content. So we are so happy to have such a great panel for discussion tonight. So thank you all for being here.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
That was a hell of an introduction. Literally none of that's true.
We should be getting paid for this or something. My goodness.
I know. Can I get I guess I'll have a recording of it, but no.
Just play that for your mom and dad. Don't worry. They'll be super proud of you. So tonight we're going to be talking about this Sons of God motif. And honestly, to me, it's kind of this, guess how often it happened that somebody could claim a divine parent. And I don't even know what order does this go in? Do I just make the claim? Do I have to die first? Like, how does this even, how do these rituals even like unfold? Who wants to tell us a little bit? Yeah. What is the whole Son of God motif? What is this about?
Well,
anybody want to step in?
I'm just going to start with saying that we might want to frame the discussion instead of Sons of God, more of like the title, A Son of God. Right, because in the ancient world, that may have been a better way to frame it, is declaration of divinity by divine ancestry, right? That's kind of where we're getting into, according to West tonight. And
yes.
If I'm completely wrong, we blame the producer.
Nope.
But like, so what are ancient claims of divinity? What would it take? What kind of paperwork do you have to provide just to claim divinity as being a son of God? I will tell you, not much. Popular attestation was typically enough, but revisionist history is also like generations later was a good way to have some historian, tag that kind of title to actually historic people. Alexander the Great is probably one of the prime examples that we will draw on several times this evening. So with that, as long as we're going to talk about various sons of God, I'm good to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying that you don't necessarily have to have evidence. You don't have to perform miracles or any of that nonsense. You just say, "Hey, I'm blessed and highly favored."
you can, but for later people to agree to it, typically you do things that other regular folks would think are, wow, that was really special. The only way they could do that is they had some kind of divine favor. Typically is, like Caesar's success. Yeah.
So you win a claim you a son of God. You wouldn't really claim it for yourself, I don't think, right?
Right.
Okay, so this isn't necessarily something that I'm running around saying, look at me, I'm special. Somebody kind of gives you that
title.
That title. Pat's making faces. There's
certain characters in history that were commented on by various Greek and Roman authors who were often considered charlatans who said they claimed it for themselves. So, there were false prophets, so to speak, that various historical sources mention people claiming divinity who may not have been divine, right? Alexander the false prophet is one of those probably characters who many people of his own time thought was claiming false attestation of divinity. So there are a few. We're not going to talk about the guy in Galilee yet because that would send a rudder.
The real one.
Yeah.
The real Son of God. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Be sure we're clear about
the
that.
the one
Exactly.
and only. So what kind of, so did this usually happen to somebody when they were living? Or is this mostly after the fact? People think you're some kind of hero and elevate you to this divinized status.
What did they do with the Roman emperors? Did they deify them while they're still alive, or only after they died?
Well, they weren't deified till death, but they were claimed as sons of divine beings during their life. But they might be the special exemption, but the majority of people weren't claimed as being divine till at death or post death, right? So the typical trope is at least you have the good taste and the common courtesy to wait till you're dead before you claim being a god. So
what about for sorry, I was just looking at the comment, but what about for like coronations? So there was no kind of like
ceremonies or
like
festivals to make them become the son of, like a son of God. Like, was there any special ceremonies to make that happen?
Well, the son would again, and Rob will probably should jump in anytime. Rob, this would be
anyone can jump in at any time.
Yes.
No,
please. Sorry.
The idea that
from everyone.
The Roman distinction was legal adoption, right? So, if the last emperor had adopted you, for example, or you were an actual genetic son, because Romans didn't really care about that as much. So you would, when your dad, the emperor, the current emperor, died and he was made a god, you could then take the title son of God. And that's exactly what Octavian and Caesar Augustus does because of his father being Julius Caesar. Once Julius Caesar's is divinized, he then takes the title son of the divine Julius or divine Caesar.
So when did this idea die out? When did this stop being a thing in history?
Has it died out?
Has it? I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder.
I'm with Ryan.
Does this still happen? Because it seems like something that you only read about in history. So is this still something that, what will people 2,000 or 6,000 or years down the line be reading about this happening in our times? Do you know what I mean? Will this be something that will carry on, in your opinion, or in anyone's opinion?
Well, it is currently going on today. Some of the minor, what we'd call kind of crazy sects of Christianity, where they believe that Jesus has returned. I mean, if you believe Jesus is alive, or I'm Jesus, I can't remember the guy's name in Florida because I don't follow crazy bullshit on TV. But there's people saying, yeah, I'm actually, I'm Jesus. The minute you claim Jesus, you're claiming divinity, right? So, but that's the common trope nowadays. But there's been a lot of people that were believed to be pretty recently like agents of God, but saying you're actual son of God, it's kind of died out as being bad taste if you're in a monotheistic region of the world. So that monotheism killed having God as a dad pretty much. So although I'm going to claim it now, get a tattoo and everything after this episode.
So were there any rules in this? Did it happen in only certain instances? Was it did they do this out of the need to consolidate power? Were they trying to oust anybody? What would be the want, or I guess the need to claim somebody as divine after they've passed?
So I can really only kind of speak for the Roman context because that's what I study. But especially as you're getting into the end of the first century, into the second century, emperors kind of have sort of carte blanche of deciding who is divine, right? They would have sisters or wives. In the case of Hadrian, he had his, young lover deified. And a lot of that kind of has to do, I think, sort of I guess I'd kind of like categorize that as maybe sort of like societal ancestor worship, right? You're creating a ancestor cult essentially around the person, right? And kind of the interesting thing is did anybody really believe these people were divine, right? I mean, there's evidence that the Apocolocyntosis, a play written about Claudius, right, being divine, and it was a lampoon on it, and right, it essentially said that he was not a good person. He was a gambler. He had people killed. And it talks about a story as he has his apotheosis, right, the act of becoming a god, and he ends up in Hades with this eternal punishment because he was not a good person, right? And even Vespasian, he says on his deathbed, I'm becoming a god, right? And a lot of people think that was sort of tongue in cheek, that he was saying that even him, as somebody who was supposedly becoming divine, didn't believe he was actually becoming divine, right?
So this is, in a way, some kind of ancestor veneration of sorts, or has something to do with venerating your ancestors?
I mean, I think that's obviously in the case of like emperors, right, it's sort of that divine kingship sort of thing, right? You have rule by, decree of the gods, right? But I think in a way too, it becomes that, right? Again, how many people are buying into the fact that these people are actually divine, right? I mean, there's always talk about how religious really were the Romans, right? Did people really kind of buy into it wholesale, or was it sort of a cultural thing? And I think as far as the state religion, the majority of people probably believed it, but when it came to the imperial cult, I'm not sure as many people kind of bought into that seriously, that people were actually divine, and that it wasn't just kind of a way to sort of prop up the power of the state, right, by having people essentially worship the ancestors of the current ruler, right?
Right. Okay. So many people, because that's what I'm wondering, like if I just heard like, oh yeah, so and so is a god, I mean, today I would be like, what the hell are you talking about? But do you think it's a similar reaction back then? We're like, yeah, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. Absolutely not. It's kind of the same, maybe not such a believing that statement.
Well, and I think something that would make it believable is time, right? So, in Julius Caesar's own generation, many people just thought Caesar was a great man, right? We read Cicero and others. Even if you didn't like Julius Caesar, you tended to respect, his ability to lead martial troops. In many cases, get a fair amount of luck on his side, militarily speaking. But after he had died, within a few generations, people look back on Caesar, and that earlier deification kind of stuck much better than it was about current people. Because that's one of the bad things is, and I'm just going to paraphrase, if you had been the emperor who died of dysentery, it was really hard for the people who watched you die of dysentery to believe that you were now a divine being. But generations removed, myths form around you, and then next thing you know, you are Vespasian or other Roman emperors who had healed the sick and cured the blind and done these great things. And now, 2 or 3 generations, everything was forgiven and you're a god just like everybody else.
Because the king's health, or the emperor, whoever you are, the ruler's health is almost a reflection of your, like, if you're favored by God, like, at least that's what I'm asking. Is that a reflection of if you are healthy or well or not, of how you are being favored by your patron God? So if you're not doing so well, you're sickly, that can look like, ooh, he's not chosen.
Well, yeah, and which gods are favoring you, right? So the Roman pantheonic system and state religion was very ingrained in their society. And it's not just a single deity. Even as someone as bad as Nero historically, like, again, these people were revered in life. The emperor had the power to destroy you for all intents and purposes. There was very little opposition to the will of the emperor in anything they did. So that kind of very real control of life and death was held in awe by ancient people. And the fact that the emperor, held the title of Pontifex Maximus. They were the head of the Romans, a big part of the Roman state, the church themselves. So, if you want to think of the idea, was the Roman emperor a king priest? In many ways, they can be compared to the king priests of Mesopotamia from earlier periods in time as well.
Right. Okay.
Not my area of expertise. We got to phone a friend and talk to them. Stand by.
Oh.
Yeah, so there's a question here. Were older myths of Mesopotamia, Egyptian myths before this having half-god pharaohs similar to this?
Yes.
Yes, Derek. Yes, I was wondering. Could you weigh in?
Yeah. So I don't think Greeks and Romans invented the wheel per se, but they kind of reinvented it, you could say. But the concept is very ancient. The name Moses in Egyptian means son of. So Ramos was the son of Ra. Tutmos was the son of Thoth. In the ancient Canaanite myth of Baal is the son of El, the Hebrew high god at one point, who is clearly from the evidence resurrected. He defeats death or Mot and then ascends to the throne as the king of gods and men. It's almost a very ancient prototypical Christ in a way, in a very kind of loose sense, but still. So it's a very ancient concept, and I think
but what about the breads and fishes, Derek? I mean,
what's that?
Well, what about bread and fishes? I don't remember.
Yeah, I don't think he did anything with bread and fish. So if, as any good apologist will tell you, if they don't have everything in common, they have nothing in common.
Goose egg.
But I think that's a good jumping off point, though, to talk about the gods that are the son of God. That I think, where you've got the king of gods that are the son of the high god. So Baal as the son of El is actually just a trope that repeats over and over again. So you got Enlil as the son of Anu or An in Mesopotamia, Marduk, son of Anu, Ashur, all these various sons of God who are, because the Heavenly Father, the high God, he's like out in space. He's not like dealing with us. He's like out in the cosmos and distant and far away. So it's his appointed sons that are the local ruling kings. And Deuteronomy, was it Deuteronomy 23:8 or 32:8 or whichever it is?
32, I think.
Where they talk about El and his, the appointing that, all the land, all the nations to his various sons, and Yahweh, Israel goes with Yahweh because Yahweh was one of the many sons of God. My whole thesis on the Old Testament is that Yahweh is competing with Baal. Baal was the incumbent king of the gods, and Yahweh is trying to knock him over because it's a reform movement and a revolutionary reform movement within the pagan First Temple period, that there's a cultural revolution happening. But yeah, Zeus is the son of Kronos. It repeats over and over again.
Very ubiquitous motif.
Yeah.
Well, Pat, you had said something on a show. I'm not going to be able to say it as eloquent as you had said.
Was I drinking? Because I can't remember.
I probably was too, so I don't remember. But you were just stating how like the pantheon is really just like that cultural representation of its own people, really kind of like the archetypes. So
right.
So I guess it makes sense that these ideas kind of, I guess, start maybe up in the divine world and make their way down into ours.
In many ways, the divine pantheons were a representation of social order, right? You had ways that the gods interacted with each other, greater divinities, intermediate, and then lesser divinities, right, were very common. Same like you had social classes. You had divine classes, so to say. The greater gods didn't worry about the activities of lesser gods. They were in charge of them. They were over them, however you want to, write your narrative, so to speak. Then there were like this lesser service divinities, these little tiny spirits or agents that, you know, were the workforce, so to speak, of the ancient world, in a divine sense. So it was often you can see it mirrored in societies that the divine order was represented, you know, if you want to say in the cosmos or in heavens, you know, and that's how many ancient people viewed it. You know, it wasn't really till, you know, some Greek Neoplatonists started getting in there and really thinking about what is the nature of a god that we started having these, well, maybe they don't have bodies and maybe they're just spirits and maybe they, you know, that there's a plurality of deities that aren't really distinct from each other and they just work together. If you haven't heard this before, you know, this is where the early Christian fathers were stealing their pages from, you know, earlier Platonic texts. They definitely copied someone else's homework on this concept.
Oh, they phoned a friend for their information.
They just stole someone else's paperwork and put their name on it.
And how much is it? Okay, because sometimes I feel like I'm not sure what is stolen, what is adapted. Are they forming at the same time? Like, are we?
Nothing's ever stolen.
Maybe not always clear. Okay.
So, like, anthropologists don't like the word steal. Everything is just, it's part of this idea of cultural diffusion and assimilation, right? That's really all this is I hear a really cool thing. Like if Ed and I were in different cultural groups and we were trading with each other, and he's a wine merchant and I'm an olive merchant, we trade stuff, we meet and trade goods. I may go, you know, Ed's a really good guy. Ed meets my daughter, and let's just say it was mutual assent. Consent was actually agreed upon. Ed marries my daughter and they go off. Well, my daughter's going to take some of her traditions. And part of Ed's agreement with me is, hey, take our ancestral gods with you. Right? And Ed, being a good guy, says, sure, you know, put them on the boat. Let's go. Ed goes home. And over time, my daughter's spreading some of her ideas locally. Ed's actually going, you know, some of these things I'm learning from my wife are actually kind of cool. He's seeing me occasionally. And next thing you know, in the little town Ed lives, eventually there may be even a temple to one of my local gods and divinities. It's changed. Ed's, you know, his group has kind of put their own cultural spin on it. But this is, you know, cultural diffusion and these ideas weren't really hard. And sometimes they happen through conquest. The Romans had this process of, you know, sometimes conquering and changing, sometimes just letting the locals do what they had already been doing. But, you know, there is this idea too that there's all these different models of cultural diffusion, but they do occur, and, you know, they're not, they're a core tenet of anthropology today. So it doesn't always have to be someone stole, but just people it was very normal to borrow ideas and cultural practices from other people and adopt them for your own purposes.
Yeah, and there was a ton of travel. You know, everyone's interacting with everybody all across Near East, from Greece to all the way to India, like going back thousands of years. Like people.
I mean, Ed had a big wine business. I mean, he was going everywhere.
And tin too. We're trading tin all over the place, man.
Right.
Ed was all over the place.
Interesting. So basically these ideas, I mean, since the land doesn't have walls other than maybe some mountainous regions, you can't stop ideas from migrating and traversing into other cultures. And like you were saying, Pat, a lot of times it was encouraged, like, okay, my daughter's going to go with you, but hey, let her keep this. So it was even encouraged. That's really it, because that's just so far out of my wheelhouse from what I know of today.
Well, one thing about, again, I don't want to, you know, channel Dr. Ramsay MacMullen, but Ramsay MacMullen's a pretty famous Roman historian. He's written quite a bit about ancestral cults, the cults of ancestor worship. Ancestor worship was kind of a thing that many cultures in the ancient Mediterranean did. Because every time I say everyone, there's one group that they'll find and go, they didn't do it, and then I'm like, oh, that's only 99% right on my very general statement. But the issue being that ancestral veneration, particularly of the dead, the recently dead, and the only a few generations removed, was very common in the ancient world and the ancient Mediterranean, ancient Near East. So the fact that when cultures were near each other and cultural groups were blending, one of the generally cultural concept that was ubiquitous and easily crossed this cultural divide was that you venerate the dead and you venerate your ancestors. Now, my cultural group may do it slightly different than you, but the concept was out there. I mean, the way that the ancient Israelites venerated their dead was very similar to their other non, and if we're talking Second Temple period, they're more leaning towards monotheism. Again, when the ancient Jews become monotheists, that and a bunch of money you can write the next great book. But particularly pre-Second Temple period, when we know Jews were engaged in this polytheistic and various forms of ancestor worship were very common, they mirrored a lot of their neighbors. And yeah, they may have done it slightly different, but ultimately in the archaeological record, we can almost never distinguish them from each other until we have large regional divides. So yeah, you can maybe distinguish between ancestor worship 500 BCE in Palestine with something going on in southern Italy, but even then they're pretty close. And it may just be the monumentization, how they're actually buried, how they're prepared. They may cremate their dead here. They may actually inhumate their burials here. But ultimately, the concept, the religious part of it, was largely the belief systems were the same. And Rob can talk about creeds. Like even we know that it was happening in the Bronze Age as well, at least in Minoan and.
I mean, it speaks to certain ideas being extremely old. That certain cultural concepts go way back to the Neolithic, like way pre-Neolithic, like back to the Ice Age, back to the dawn of culture, and we don't really know what ideas. I mean, of course, I'll make my pitch with Mother Goddess, but yeah, that certain ideas. I think the veneration of the dead, ritual burials, this kind of thing, I think probably is really old, and which is why you get all these variations on it that spit out. The different people, make self-conscious decisions to do it slightly differently to identify their own unique take on it. But at the end of the day, everyone's doing the same, remembering the dead. I think we should do more of it. Frankly, I think it's kind of a shame we don't do it as much anymore.
I agree with you on that one. I kind of feel like we really should pay more respect to our ancestors and whatnot than what we do versus invisible forces. I don't know. I think I'd feel good knowing people were saying some good shit about me 5 years from 5 years from my death. I guess it doesn't change anything. I'm still dead. So speaking of,
we still kind of do it though. One thing, like sometimes what we consider is like the thing your grandmother told you. How many of you growing up heard that like your grandparents are watching over you?
Right.
I was told that as a child, particularly after grandma and grandpa died. I was told they'll be around. And by the way, if you're Catholic or Orthodox, this idea of ancestor veneration and the cult of the saints, yeah, it's the same shit. I hate to break it to you, but this is the way it goes. So for me, this was not a big cultural leap. My Protestant friends were like, yeah, I don't know. If grandma's not in heaven, where is she? Because she has to be in hell then. Because Protestants have a very rigid
black and white.
I'm like, nah, and I just say convert to Catholicism, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Then you can have free floating spirits out there because purgatory doesn't always keep them right where they need to be.
I always hated that as a kid because it made me feel like, they're watching when I'm they're watching when I'm
yeah. But it is a weird thought. And now that I don't really have any beliefs, like I don't really think too much about it other than just to think about it, but I'm not really too bothered. But going back into the ancient world, like how were they? Well, I mean, look at Christians today. They really feel like there's invisible beings that are watching their every move. But boy, I wonder how much more superstitious, if at all, it would have been back in the ancient world, if there would have been any differences. I wonder. Maybe not.
Your average fundamentalist evangelical is as religiously credulous as your average Roman. That's one thing you need to understand.
There you go.
Ancient people. If your frame of reference were spirits and agents, let's just call them divine beings, they're kind of everywhere, and they're kind of ubiquitous. At least Greeks and Romans believe that they're good and bad out there. If you're a modern evangelical fundamentalist, and you believe they're everywhere, but they're bad, right? Except maybe some angels that are watching you. That's the exact same frame of reference. So when a modern Christian goes, yeah, but they were really superstitious and they were dumb for what they believed, the frame of reference is identical. Like that's what ancient writers, when they were talking about the rubes, the rustics, right? The pagans by the Pagani, when Roman writers were writing about that, they're saying, yeah, those people, the average Joe and Jane Roman living in Italy, they believe some crazy shit, like the spirits wander everywhere, that, there's divinities hiding behind everything, that everything has a divine spirit attached to it. Think about what they were saying. And they were saying those people are they're a little too credulous, a little bit too, and that's kind of what a lot of modern Christians believe today. And the context is, times change, but not really the general concept.
Yeah, that's so true.
So for these people who pass on and get this this title, are there people who do believe it and take it to heart and like start to, I don't know, try to appease this person they think is a god now, like treating them as such? It's like that serious? How serious is it?
Wait, what happened with the Moonies? Didn't they keep their guys?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but didn't the dad die and now someone else has carried it on?
I think it's the son, right? I'm pretty sure it's
the son
the
is around
son.
leading it now, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
What did they do with the father? Did they keep him around as a corpse for a while? I forget.
I don't know.
Oh, I would have to look that up. That's a good question.
I've actually wanted to know what you guys thought about this question someone asked in the chat. I just want to know who created L. Does anyone know where that came from, the inception of L?
Is he Anu?
Derek, do you know?
I think L is
Canaanite.
A Canaanite?
Yeah.
Right. L is a Canaanite name. Yeah, I think it's the same characters, An and Anu. And I would actually be willing to put forth a thesis that he goes as far back as the Venus figurines in the Ice Age, that he's always been seen as immaterial, and the mother was always seen as the material, and that this father and mother trope has been going on since all time, and that the father's always been the immaterial and the mother's always been the material, and that yin yang has been around for a long time. And that's why they made, this is my theory, it's totally theory.
Okay.
That's why they were making the Venus figurines, and they don't make any male to go with it. Because it's not that they didn't have the notion of a father, it's that they thought of the father the same way they think of the father now, that he's out in space, he's immaterial, he's ephemeral, you can't touch him, you can't see him. The mother is what you can see and touch and feel. She's Mother Earth, she's the material world. Mother and father, immaterial, material. Like that's what modern day Hindus describe it as. I think that idea could have gone back. I think that idea could have gone back a long way.
I do agree with that. It does seem that these ideas are kind of, it's amazing to me that an idea can be formed like so far away from another culture, but still have so much in common. And again, like there's travel, there's crisscross and all that, but it just seems like there's some kind of connection that everybody's looking for. They're looking for something.
So academics this is the idea of the Jungian archetype, but I believe in the Jungian archetype of like these are
what is that? I'm sorry, what is that?
So Carl Jung, the psychologist.
Okay, sorry.
He had the idea of the archetype of like that the gods are archetypes of the human mind, of the human consciousness, of our collective consciousness. And there's a reason why these metaphors and these tropes repeat over and over again, because they speak to something fundamental in the wiring of our psyche, and that they are, and so they keep getting repeated, used, and renamed, and used over and over again. That was Carl Jung's idea, and it has a certain follower, but academics will reject it. I happen to think it has a lot of appeal.
Has a lot of appeal to me.
There's a question that just got put in the chat that I would like to read. Thank you. By Phil. Thank you, Phil. And I just wanted to say hi to everyone who's in the chat asking questions and engaging. We love everyone who comes and watches every week. So thank you so much. Phil asked, and I really can relate to this question. I'm uneducated in your world. Would you agree with my simple view that all these deities, pharaohs, so-called sons of God, just simply the earliest forms of extreme narcissistic personality disorder. So
I
do you
like
think that
it.
that's where this originates from? They just are so obsessed with themselves.
I'm special.
I would say yes, but not as bad as our last president.
Okay.
Not that bad, but sure.
Would
Just
he be
not
like at
that
the top?
severe.
I'm going to disagree. I think
Okay.
what these were manifestations of state order. So
Oh.
using the Pharaoh as an example, the Pharaoh doesn't become divine until they get the breath of the gods, the breath of Horus breathed into them, right? So like they're at a point they're immortal, who becomes immortal, who becomes a divine being on earth, right? And that mortality may be a semi-divinity while they're alive as Pharaoh, waiting to become a god at their death, right? A full god, a fully articulated deity. But it preserves state social order. Believing the Pharaoh is a direct connection to the greater divinities that are out there. He becomes the manifestation of the state's will. That's why killing the Pharaoh, regicide in the ancient world, particularly if you believe these divinities were partially divine, becomes so abhorrent to the concept in the ancient world that you're not only defying normal social order of temporal social order, you're defying social order of a cosmic and celestial scale. So these apparatuses were placed upon these societies, and it did help if you had a big ego, but I don't think you could be raised as a future emperor or a future pharaoh and not believe that your shit doesn't stink. I mean, that's just going to be the way you go. But remember that pharaohs in life and emperors in life, particularly those that were in royal families back in those times, they were always worried about getting killed too. I mean, people always talk about Julius Caesar, how awesome he was and his personality. He was also someone that almost was executed by Sulla. So, he survived his own death, just by scant circumstance of history. He escaped Italy fast enough during the reign of Sulla. So there is this idea that once in place and once seen as an agent of not only the state but of the gods themselves, that acting against those divinities become very countercultural for the entire people. And having an emperor be your god also helps with paying your taxes on time, and they act as an agent. Remember, a lot of your taxes are going for these social programs that are part of the state religious system as well, or at least that's what people could see it as. The great works are happening under the pharaohs, the emperors, and various kings of the ancient world.
I have a question. So with what you just said, Pat, and this question is for anybody, do I have an echo or is that somebody else? It might be me. Sorry, you guys. I have this new setup, the mechanisms that they use basically to keep this social order. So it's almost like religion and politics combined and such. Is that anything that you see current day? Do you see that idea being unraveled in our country, our religion, our state government?
We're all muting to see who has the echo.
I would say I honestly think that at least the ancient Egyptian and ancient Mesopotamian religions that we know of, that those are 100% imperial and 100% like political, top down. But I wouldn't say that's like the beginning of religion per se. Like I think there's religion for long before that. But I do think those religions, that go back to the beginning of writing and the oldest ones we know of, those are 100% imperial for sure. And Christianity is 100% imperial, and Islam. These are like imperial state religions for sure.
Right. So we can kind of see that same idea today. So it still exists. It's still intrinsically tied into our social standings even today.
Christianity is 100% like a state religion. It's helped to organize the entire country and morality, and it's not so easy to unwind it either. Like it's pretty deeply woven into like the tapestry that makes up Western culture. It's yeah, it's so foundational.
So thoughts on this quote, and when we say also that the Word, who is with, I'm guessing word would be Jesus because it's capitalized, who is the first birth of God, was produced without sexual union, and that he, Jesus Christ, our teacher, was crucified and died and rose again, and ascended into heaven. We propound nothing different from what you believe regarding those whom you esteem sons of Jupiter. Is there more?
Yes.
So what are your thoughts on that quote?
Yeah, Justin Martyr's making an appeal that the concept of Jesus as a divine being was no different than very similar Greco-Roman concepts. You know, one of the things that I like is, you know, I'll talk to an apologist and they'll say something to the effect of, well, see, the nature of Jesus is so different because he was conceived outside of a sexual union. Well, there were many ancient deities that conceived their children outside of a sexual union, so there really was no difference. Everybody talks about, like, well, didn't Zeus rape this person or rape that person? Well, let's talk about the concept. Typically, it's he came upon her. Like, the verbiage, even in the original Greek source that we have, was something that could be considered sex, but it could be something just as easily as the idea of, you know, conceived of the Holy Spirit, because divine beings were divine beings. They were these, you know, amorphous entities that could assume multiple forms and physical manifestations. So, yeah, it wasn't considered a normal, low-born sexual union across the board. You know, even though gods may have a penis, they didn't necessarily use them the same way like your husband would in a mundane setting.
Right. Just wanted to thank Smashing the Patriarchy for their super chat. They just thank you so much for that. We appreciate your support to our channel. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that quote? Thoughts?
I think M. David Litwa covers this brilliantly in Jesus Dios, the early Christian depiction of Jesus as a Mediterranean god, discussing Plutarch's, I think it's Plutarch's Table Talk in, I want to say Moralia. I could be wrong about that, but basically Plutarch does say that Plato was the offspring of Apollo, and that Apollo had impregnated his mother Perictione via the pneuma. This was not sexual activity. It was just the pneuma of God. That's the spirit or breath of God, much like we find in the Gospels of you know, Matthew and Luke. So yeah, we do have such a tale of sexless conception pretty explicitly in Plutarch there.
Right, and I think we can see shifting tides, like the older Greek, you know, great thing about Greek mythology and Roman mythology is they did get written, different versions of the same myth were written over time. And we do see in the 1st and 2nd century CE this kind of different representations, and even earlier 1st and 2nd century BCE, different representations of what I'm going to call divine impregnation, right? Like this idea that, well, you could actually get pregnant if a god just walked up and touched you on your tummy, right? Like this idea that it's magic. How gods get women pregnant is magical, so you don't really need to know about it, and it's beyond your mortal comprehension, right? So when some guy in the 2nd century CE is going, yeah, well, Jesus wasn't actually conceived with a normal sexual activity, they weren't inventing a new trope. The trope's already been out there. Other people were engaging with it, because I will tell you that it wasn't uncommon in many ancient societies to claim you didn't know who the dad was of certain types of, you know, the idea of people having children who the fathers are either unknown or had been the victims of violent crime against women, because that's what it was actually happening. There were cultural tropes as well. Cultural ways that we deal with this fact that in many cases subjected people, that subjugation was often aimed at the surviving women and children of those cultures. So there were, again, I typically use the example of, people go, I'm a son of Scotland. And when you actually get into where the phrase that comes from the medieval era, it's something that was said about a lot of sons who didn't know who their fathers were, because during the English conquest of the region, what was done to the female Scottish population. But it was a cultural trope to say, look, we're never going to ask you who your father is, because as far as we're concerned, you're Scottish, right? Even though some of these men, these young boys being born and daughters being born, were being born from, acts that were actively perpetrated against not only individuals, but the society in general, right? So that happened in antiquity as well. So sometimes saying, someone's a son or daughter of a certain country meant that we don't know who their parents are, but we're going to assume that they're part of our group because of what happened to our people and for us to culturally survive. So.
Right.
That makes a lot of sense. Sorry, I was muted. That makes a lot of sense when you're talking about family preservation, right?
And cultural preservation. This is about society surviving as well, right?
Yeah, so very important. That makes a lot of sense. Dan D, I wanted to thank you so much for your support, and because of that, if you would like, I give you permission to have some kind of immaculate conception with one of the gentlemen up here, preferably not myself or Stacy,
or me.
Yeah, not us.
Perform a real miracle.
Right. Well, that's what I'm saying. If you can do that, you have the option to for that $10.
$10 is $10.
Hey, we don't turn our nose up at anything here on Skeptic Haven. Oh dear. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that one too.
We really appreciate you being here. Were there any comments that I missed in the chat?
I hope
I have not missed any.
We have one just from Skeptic Haven. I'm not sure. Maybe we would have addressed it in just the way we were talking, but there was a question that said, could Jesus be a half man, half God too, as in the aspect that he was fictitious, or is mythicism just plain old crazy? Anyone like to tackle that one in the last couple of because
what is Jesus?
It's two different questions, right? Like, is mythicism unrealistic? I don't take that position, but I'm also not a mythicist.
Right.
But the idea
people get really heated about that,
and I think that, like, if you're asking whether or not early Christians considered Jesus literally a demigod, my answer would be yes. I think early Christians perceived, I don't think until you get into the late 3rd and early 4th century that you really see Christians worrying about how much God is Jesus, right? As they're working out this Trinitarian formula, they're also having to deal with, how do we deal with demigods? Well, Jesus can't be a demigod because a demigod destroys the Trinity as well. So if you're a Trinitarian, Jesus can't be a semi-divine or demigod. It breaks the system down. But when you look at what Gnostics, particularly in the 2nd and 3rd century, and Christians of the late 1st and early 2nd century appear to be saying, many of them believe that he was a man who was also God, but not equal in both measures. He was a demigod who at his death achieved apotheosis. If you just follow the literary accounts and the parallels of, we're just going to call them pagan sources of the period, Jesus' death and resurrection mirrors what happens to demigods, or people that have some divine ancestry and lineage at death. Apotheosis, Jesus had an apotheosis. This idea that he was a mortal who becomes a god is much easier to defend in the text than saying he was always man and was always God. Because if you're saying that the hypostatic union is this 100% thing, there's many things in the gospel accounts that would actually portray that. Like, if you were a god walking on earth in the ancient world, because it did happen occasionally, you didn't get sick. You didn't have mortal afflictions. The fact that Jesus suffers shows that he's immortal, no different, a semi-mortal, half god, half man, no different than Heracles. Heracles suffered as a person. Yeah, he could always do great and exceptional things, but Heracles was not, he could die. And that's part of the problem. Gods don't die in the ancient world they may travel to the other world, the if you want to call it Hades, but they don't ever die. And they may get trapped in the underworld, but that's not a death in the same concept as like, hey, I'm not here today and I'm gone tomorrow.
And he even, I mean, according to the New Testament, Jesus even went down into Hades or whatever they called. I don't know if they called it Hades. They called it Gehenna. I don't know which scripture it was, and then came back, which is kind of like the ultimate, I don't know, cool dude thing to do, because all the dying and rising gods, I don't know that they actually went to hell and back.
In the first, I was just going to say, in the first century play Hercules Otaeus, which is thought to have been written by Seneca, though I don't think historians are positive about that. Hercules, after his death, appears to his weeping mother Alcmena and tells her, do not mourn for me, for I've been granted my place in heaven among the gods. It's a scene that very much mirrors the whole Mary Magdalene bit in the Gospel of John, which is pretty wild.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah,
you bet it is.
And
I bet it is.
I will add this. I don't want to get into to derail this, but the harrowing of hell, the idea that Jesus goes to hell and then comes back after saving a bunch of souls, that's a later Christian development. Like, the only place it's even sort of a reference to it is in 1 Peter 4. And it coincides with earlier forms of ancestor worship, right? Like this is a later Christian concept. Like the idea that descended into hell and on the third day rose, you don't get that till the Nicene Creed, right? And that's hundreds of years later. Lots of doctrine has developed, but the text actually there's nowhere in the Old Testament, the New Testament specifically says Jesus went into hell, gathered souls, and came back. There's an extrapolation of, there's this one little weird line in 1 Peter 4, like I think it's verse 6 or 7 or 8, I can't remember, where he says maybe he did this, but all it says is that the dead were preached to. And they're like, well, how did it happen? So they made up this whole story, which has a doctrine behind it. And now people just say it happened. But the only place that we get a first heavy attestation that it's a Christian doctrine of faith is in the later Nicene Creed, which again is almost the 5th century. So
I was just talking about the rich man and Lazarus. It's like the parable. I forget which scripture it's from, but when he supposedly sees the bosom of Abraham in the bosom of hell. Well, you guys, we're getting close to the 1 hour mark. Is there anything that anybody would like to throw into the ring that we didn't get to cover?
Throw it in.
Yeah, just toss it in.
I want to hear what everybody's favorite son of God is.
Yeah. Panel.
Me,
go for it.
I'm a daughter of Jesus. So me.
Yeah, I would say that's probably the only one I know the most about being a growing up Christian. So I'll just say that one.
I'm going to go with Augustus because I think that is, granted, the Son of God theme is ubiquitous in the ancient Mediterranean world. I think the Gospels, when we're discussing the actual historical and cultural context, where this idea is probably most immediately emerging from, is they are competing with the imperial cult. Jesus is they're doing competitive assimilation or one-upmanship. So, Caesar Augustus, my goodness, nearly contemporary with Jesus, was thought to be Divi Filius, son of God, also referred to as the savior of the world. There's an ancient monument that declares the birthday of the God who is for us the gospel or the good news. It's very obvious that they are doing something of a counterblast to the imperial cult and probably most specifically Caesar Augustus. So I think that's where you're getting a lot of this New Testament imagery. And
there was a star associated with Caesar as well, which is, people forget that there were divine omens prior to his birth involving celestial bodies.
Which star?
I think it's Venus, right? Is I think the star, but I don't remember the exact reference, but there was a star in the sky that was exceptionally bright, projecting.
Well, he said to be the son of Venus. He said he was a son of that.
Right. So again, I think that's the reference that was placed in I can't do it off the top of my head, but yeah.
And Philo of Alexandria said that he calmed torrential storms and healed pestilences common to Greeks and barbarians. He worked miracles, according to Philo. That's in early 1st century CE that Philo of Alexandria is saying this about Augustus.
Yeah.
All right.
God, I know a lot of shit.
Yes, you do.
I like that. Ed, do you have a favorite son of God?
Yeah, for all the wrong reasons and strictly for entertainment purposes. My favorite is a nasty old blood-soaked old Baal, who loves slaughtering people just because he's got the most badass girlfriend, Anat, who is the death goddess there, who all the scholars, for the record, completely mischaracterize as a mere warrior goddess. She's no mere warrior goddess. She's the most powerful deity on the chessboard. So for that reason, I choose Baal.
That's a good one.
Even though he's a chump and gets totally defeated later on, and as deservedly so.
He comes back.
I know Rob has one. He's got to.
I don't know. That's kind of it's like sort of what's your favorite emperor, and I don't know. I mean, pick one. Trajan, sure. Yeah, Trajan.
So I'm doing this in honor of Smash the Patriarchy. I'm gonna say Hippolyta was my favorite daughter of God because she was the daughter of Ares and queen of the Amazons.
Oh, that's a good
because one thing we didn't have time to get into is they're also daughters of the gods. They're much fewer in literature, but there are in Greek and Roman context divine beings that are daughters of the gods. And I'm really surprised you didn't ask it, Ryan. But there are a few in Greek and Roman literature, women who are considered to be the divine offspring. Again,
so which Amazon queen was that? Like what era?
Hippolyta. That's I think she's listed as this daughter of Ares in the Iliad. But I know that in several places they repeat the. Well, wait a minute.
Okay.
Schliemann would disagree. Just kidding. No, but I would say that in history, in mythology and in popular belief, there were these daughters of the gods, and also there were divinations of various empresses as well.
Female gods, goddesses. Now the show's gone completely woke. Oh.
How dare we? I know that Atherat has that she has sons, but they don't call them. I don't believe anywhere that I've seen they call them daughters. So that's really cool. I
know there's 70 sons of Asherah for sure.
Yeah. And actually, Ed, since you're here, do you believe that she's also named under her title of Kudshu? Daughters of Kudshu because some people dispute that. I'm just curious if you believe
I associate Kudshu or Kadesh with Asherah. I think that's the Egyptian name for it. That's my take on it. But scholars like to get very nitpicky about this stuff. They can never come to agreement.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that when we look at I'm getting way off track because I was studying the Scythians. When we look at Amazons, the concept of Greeks and Romans Amazons, many of the queens of the Amazon people were believed to be like daughters of Ares. So that's explained their martial ability, right? That these women, oh my gosh, they could outride, outshoot, and outsword a lot of the men. So they got to be a daughter of Ares, right? At least their queens do.
Yeah, and one of their queens killed King Cyrus and took his head, which is like my favorite of the Scythian Amazon queens.
A daughter of Ares. How else would you explain it?
Wait, the great King Cyrus?
The great King Cyrus got his head taken.
Shut up.
As a prize by a Scythian warrior queen.
Oh, I didn't realize that was him. Oh dear.
I know they don't talk about that too much.
Because he's like the Messiah of the Bible.
I know, right? And he went and tried to invade Scythian lands, and his son, they killed the royal prince, the Scythian prince, and the warrior queen took personal revenge. And this is kind of a legend, right? But the warrior queen, and so they kept retreating. The Scythians did, to draw the Persians deeper and deeper into the lands until they cut them off. And then they slaughtered them all and killed King Cyrus and took his head as a war prize and kept it in a bag of wine for years and years, supposedly.
Apostasy, I could see you doing that. I see you doing some head chopping.
Oh, totally. It's right up my alley.
Find out.
Well, it was kind of an old trope. You can't find the Scythians while they still have their horses. So, like, even Alexander the Great, because he fights them as well, he has to bottleneck them into like mountainous regions where the horses don't. But on the plains, the Scythians were not undefeatable, but were generally believed to be undefeatable in their time period because their horses were stronger, their archers were better, and the Scythians, men and women, both not necessarily both fought all the time, but both were trained in martial art, martial tradition is a good way to think of it. I'm not going to say that they were a society where men fought alongside women because the archaeology actually doesn't bear that out other than in some cases. But the women were trained to protect the tribal lands while the men were out doing war. So if you just happen to think, well, the men are gone, we're going to go raid a Scythian village. Sorry, bro, because everybody there knows how to use a bow and a sword, and then they wipe out the invaders. It was very, and Scythian women were considered ferocious warriors.
I love it.
Covered in tattoos, head to toe.
Well, lots of tattoos.
Now, what evidence would there be for that? Is there writings, or do we
Loads archaeological and literary evidence?
Yeah, because they found Scythian graves, hundreds or even thousands, loads and loads of them for a long period of time, and like 20% of the graves are warrior women. Yeah. So my understanding, to expand on what Pat was saying, my understanding on it is that all the girls were trained to ride and fight at a young age, and then once they get to be childbearing age, they have a choice to like either hang back, because they would tow their wagons around, so you could either hang back with the wagons with the food and the children, or the girls that had the proclivity for it were free to go continue to fight with the men, and they would fight alongside the men. And a woman on horseback with a bow and arrow is every bit as deadly as a man, and so like they were skilled.
But even the ones that hung back, even the women that were, I wouldn't say, that chose to hang out with the wagon loggers, because that's what they called them in antiquity, they were considered like combatants as well. There were the Scythians, other than children, little children, because once you were old enough to like shoot a bow or throw a javelin, you were a combatant in Scythian society. So only like infants and toddlers were non-combatants. I will plug a book right now since we're talking about the ancient Scythians. Barry Cunliffe wrote a book a couple years ago on the ancient Scythians called The Ancient Scythians. It's an absolutely fabulous text. If you haven't read about it, there's so many things about the ancient Scythians that, first of all, like their priests and priestesses appeared to have were androgynous. They purposely, men that became priests, I don't want to use the word cross-dress, but they took on the trappings of women, a cultural tradition. And so there were many things about Scythian society like that were considered like at the time, Greeks went, oh my God, who are these people? Their values are so different than ours. But when we look at them now, we can see that there was quite a bit of uniqueness in Scythian society that made them very strange to people that ran into them. And some of that was this idea that men and women were much more, although there were gender roles, the gender roles seem to be much more fungible than many of the cultures that they operated contemporaneously with.
They were some of the last of the old matriarchal cultures that Maria Gimbu was talking about.
Yeah,
they were like the last holdouts of matriarchy.
Damn. Bring it back. Awesome. Well, okay.
Okay, last question.
Was Jesus the only begotten son? Were you thinking there's a couple of them? Twin?
Many sons of El. Many sons of El.
Yeah, it depends on which. If Ed's talking about like, there are lots of sons of the various gods in the Old Testament, right? Unless you are one of those people that thinks Yahweh is El, which shows that you don't actually know what you're talking about. But yeah, El had many sons,
and Yahweh was one of them. And
yeah, Jesus is just El's grandson.
Great grandson.
right?
One of those. There's a great in there somewhere.
Something
Maybe he's
like that.
competition with Yahweh.
Even that verbiage, the firstborn son of God, you find that in Philo before the New Testament, in Philo of Alexandria, where he ascribes that title to his logos.
Now, I just thought of something. So just like with Jesus, and he not only is he claiming like a divine parentage, he's also claiming a connection to David as like his right to have some authority. Did that happen too? Did people come along and say, oh, hey, I was Caesar's great nephew-uncle?
Nephew-uncle? Is that a word?
You did. No, it's not
You've
a word.
heard it here, folks.
You've heard it here, folks. But was that a common thing too? Or is this just a special Jeebus moment? Don't everybody go at once.
Yeah, I don't know if Jesus was necessarily thought to, well, what was he thought to be an heir of David, or was he literally an heir of David, or did they sort of retroject that onto him at a later time?
Yeah, I don't believe any of
Yeah.
I believe I think that with I don't know if it's Mary's
Yeah, I
heritage
don't know
or whoever it is, they try to connect her back.
What do you say about that? Would they say that Jesus would have made that claim in his lifetime? Is that? Yeah, I'm curious. Actually, I don't know the answer to that. If that's if the scholars think that's one of the things that he actually said himself, or is that something that people added on later on? I don't know. That exercise has been done. The answer is there somewhere.
I mean, if they thought that, if his followers thought that he was the Messiah during his lifetime, then they must have thought so, because you had to be an heir of David, right? But who knows for sure?
Interesting.
And that's what makes Matthew's genealogy so problematic.
Well, yeah, and then there's that there's different genealogies that don't line up. Well, there's so much that don't line up because they really don't harmonize. They try to harmonize, but it's just not there. Well, I have had a very interesting talk with you all. This was some new information for me. I really appreciate you all coming. Stacy, was there anything that you needed to get out of the way? And I guess we should ask these gentlemen if they have any socials that they want to share.
Where can everyone find you guys? Do you have channels? Do you have social media? Where can people follow you and find out more? Pat, do you want to start with you?
Sure. I killed my Twitter account.
Okay.
I'm not doing much with my YouTube channel, Discovering Ancient History with Pat Lowinger. But if you want to take a course with me, either credit or non-credit, you can look me up at Peninsula College at pencol.edu. And it's the beginning of a new quarter, and we just started class on Wednesday. So go ahead and jump on in.
Oh, I want to do some classes.
Derek, where can we all find you?
Yeah, you can. My YouTube channel is Atheologica, just as you see it spelled there under my name. So find me there, and you can follow me on social media. On Facebook, just look me up precisely as my name is spelled there, and then on OnlyFans as Captain Jack.
Okay.
So I show all, and it's completely free.
Do you have a peg leg, Captain Jack?
I do feature a peg leg. I sawed my leg off just for the OnlyFans.
Oh God!
So I'm committed. I am 100%.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah. So be there for it.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Sorry. Okay, thank you so much for that wonderful plug. I thought pegging as soon as I met him.
Most people do. Ryan. You're not alone. I mean, really naked.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
He's great. Okay. Thank you for that. Edward Dodge,
you're welcome.
Where can we find you?
So I have a Substack, occasionally blog, edwarddodge.substack.com, or lostgoddess.io is a website that I have. You can connect with me there. Facebook, you can search my name, you can find me. I'm not really that active on social media these days, but yeah, the Substack occasionally. blog when I get the inspiration.
Perfect. Thank you. And Rob, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have my website, romantheempire.com. And then all the social media, just everything, all the links are on the page. Twitter is the main one I use, but then I got one of everything when Twitter looked like it was going to fall apart, and maybe it still will. Hopefully.
Who knows, right?
So everywhere, just like everywhere. But Twitter's really the one that I'm active on.
And if you're wanting to look at archaeological sites throughout the ancient Mediterranean, Rob is a really good person to follow. So Roman, Roamin, the Empire, like Ryan cannot do it. No one can do it enough justice just by talking about how cool it is. How many entries do you have on there currently, Rob?
I've been doing it I've been posting something every 2 weeks since like 2017. So
Sheesh.
Yeah, and these are sites that he's gone to either as an active archaeologist or as a tourist, but an interested tourist with a lot of training. So.
Awesome. Thank you. And
Yeah, you should check it out.
Ryan, where can we find you?
Oh, well, you can find me at Ryan Cautastic, just like my name says. I am on TikTok at Tax the Churches. I am on Twitter for under @Yahoo. Yes, I know, just to be difficult. And I think that's probably enough. I think y'all had enough of me, it seems. So
Awesome. And you can find me here every Wednesday. Normally our show's on Wednesday night. So thank you for everyone being here in the chat and watching on Thursdays. And I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And don't forget that we have other shows throughout the week. This Saturday at 3:30, we have Women of Virtue in the Bible. We have special guests Apostate Ashley and Deborah Grace. So don't forget to tune in for that. And we also have the Global Atheists on Saturday as well, finding false African roots with the topic of witch doctors. So that'll be an interesting show as well. We also wanted to remind you that we have a Patreon. You can join that. We want to thank our patrons, Tara S., Ryan, Deneen Murphy, that's my mom, Andy,
Mama D.
Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Colson, Phil Calderon. So thank you for all of that. And also one really quick announcement. If there's anyone out there who would like to help volunteer for Skeptic Haven, we are looking for people to help kind of behind the scenes. Oh, we have a volunteer. Thank you. Pickles.
she's coming on. She's coming. Yeah, Pickles is coming on.
Yes,
She's got something to
you.
say.
So if you are interested in that, you can get in touch with us through our socials, Instagram, Twitter. We would love to talk to you about that. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Thank you to our wonderful panel of guests. We appreciate your time and for sticking around afterwards and just for your input and your time and your talent. So thank you again, and we will see you next week. Bye.